Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
You're listening to episode 13 of season 2. I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, industry leader in all things CI and CD. Today, I'm joined by CEO of tEQuitable, Lisa Gelobter. Lisa, thanks so much for joining you. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Super happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm glad that we're talking about this. I love the concept of the podcast generally.
Thank you. It's been a blast. I mean, we're talking to all kinds of people about all kinds of different things, and I get to learn constantly, which is one of the highlights. And I will say, for all the conversations that I've ever had with you, I've always learned something. So I'm looking forward to getting some of it on the record.
Back at you, by the way.
Not to put too much pressure on. I feel like I do this every episode, actually, but I'm very fortunate to get to talk to people who know a lot and can teach me a lot. So, we talked about this a little bit in advance. One of the things that I'm really interested in is, we've been talking about failure and learning from failure, and what I'm interested in is kind of the cultural perspective. Different people, different backgrounds, how they interpret this thing that some of us sort of treat rather flippantly, and so before we get into that, by way of background, can you just tell us a little bit about tEQuitable, what it is you're trying to do there? And the reason I'm so interested in this is I think you have a pretty broad set of experiences and exposure through that work.
Yeah, absolutely. So tEQuitable is we're trying to use technology to make workplaces more equitable. And our mission really is to help companies create work culture that's going to work for everyone, right? So across all kinds of demographics, all kinds of spectrums. And so really trying to part of what we do is we really try to help organizations create a culture around collaboration, around lifting people up, around psychological safety. And as you think about kind of some of the tests where people say, oh, do you feel psychologically safe? It's about this idea of feeling empowered to take risks, feeling safe in putting stuff forward and knowing that it's not going to come back to bite you in the butt. Is there cursing allowed on this? We
Yes.
should have refrained.
Yes.
Okay.
We get the little E on the episodes where there's cursing. So if I have at it.
But so that's what we're trying to do, right? So we provide a sounding board for employees where they can come, get advice, explore their options, right? Trying to figure out what their next steps should be so they can feel empowered, so they can have some agency. And so figuring out how they can set themselves up for success in this workplace environment, and one of the biggest things that we do is really try to support them no matter where they're coming from, right? So tEQuitable is a third-party tech-enabled ombuds, which means that we're a neutral, right? So it's not this person is right, this person is wrong. It's about your feelings are legitimate. Let's figure out what you actually want the outcomes to be and how we can help you set an action plan in place to get you there, and really try to tease apart what's really fundamentally important to you, and help you solve for that. And so, that's the work that we do. So to your point, we hear so many different stories, and perspectives and situations, and what does it mean to not fail, but to be successful? And then the flip side of it, of course, what we do is we anonymize and aggregate the data. And so we try to use that to provide data and insights back to an organizations, right? So we can help them address systemic issues within their culture, and make things that are really actionable so we can start to make change, right? For us, we're really trying to work on this, create this virtuous cycle where we empower and support employees, but we're also helping companies address the issues before they escalate, right? Trying to create this virtuous cycle.
Got it. Well, perfect. You highlighted psychological safety in there, which I think is a term that lots of us use and are familiar with, but I'm excited to pick it apart, right? So, again, as a leader, as someone who's trying to make forward progress, learn as we go, I spend a lot of time thinking about, talking about failure, learning from failure. And I think I throw that word around, fairly comfortably. and I don't know about flippantly, but I mean something by it, but don't treat it in the way that I think some people do. And uh, I had a listener write in actually after one of our episodes and say, hey, you're constantly talking about failure. That's really interesting. I like to learn from this. In my culture, my background, we don't treat failure comfortably. We sort of, hide it away and do anything we can to cover it up and save face and these sorts of things. And it's taken some time to try to get past that and start to use it as a tool or think about it differently. This is an opportunity. This is something I've learned. This is helpful to me in the long term. And so I'm curious if that's a broader experience that you're seeing, and sort of how we can think about the narratives that individuals are bringing to this and what they're hearing as, we're saying, oh, it's fine, just fail fast and learn from failure. And it's totally, it's great. We're going to keep going. And, what are people bringing to that? What are the narratives that are people bringing? And B, how do we help them sort of see, what collectively we believe is okay, what it's safe to do, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point. So, right. I want to say not everyone is created equal. And by that, I mean that the opportunities that people are given are not created equal. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's that saying that says, genius is equally distributed across zip codes, but opportunity is not. And so, yes, there might be fundamentally kind of what your upbringing promotes, what it looks like culturally to you, but there's also the external factors that go into it, right? Mm-hmm. And so where you might be able to feel comfortable talking about failure and know that it's not necessarily going to cost you opportunities, that is not true for all of us. One of the things, actually, I have somebody who works in venture capital has been trying to make change in terms of who has access to funds and what does success look like, especially for the Black community. And, and the way he described it was, what success looks like is when Black founders can do a startup and fail and yet be able to go back out and raise more money to do another startup, and over and over and over again. Because there are a lot of white men specifically who have had that opportunity. So the definition of what failure looks like for them is very, very different than how it would be perceived if one of us did it. And so there's how you personally feel about it, and there's definitely kind of stigma there that you need to work through, and I can talk about that a little bit. But there's also just external factors, and what the repercussions are for failure can be very, very different depending on who you are, what you look like, what your demographic is. It's tough.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. And what it says to me is there's the talk and there's the action, right? Like we can talk all we want about, hey, we want to learn from failure, et cetera, et cetera. But to the point of that story, when people fail, they need to have the next opportunity and fail. Like that's a large scale measure it's a large scale failure. Like, and I've been there, like I've started companies that, had different levels of exits, however you want to describe. See, I just use different words, like whatever, like we had different outcomes and we learned from all of them and they were great. And here I am. So, get that. But even on the day to day, like, hey, we're going to go try a thing and it's probably not going to work exactly the way we expected. And that's going to be okay, because even, within that startup, if you take that whole thing, right, to get to a good outcome, I'm going to do a bunch of things that didn't go well and learn and adapt and try again. And, maybe even like a smaller version of that VC conversation, they're not going to ask for their money back when I haven't figured it out right away. They're going to support me. Maybe they're going to give me a little bit of an extension because they see that I'm close. And I use I to talk about everybody, so it's terrible from a third person perspective. But like there's different behaviors on much smaller scales, and the action is as important, right? Like tell me that I can go try something and fail, great. But when I do, what's your response, right? And then what do I get to do next? Like now I am I'm still using, okay, let's say me in the first person. Like for all of the things that I've tried, I have learned what works and what doesn't and can execute faster, right? And why can I do that? Because I tried and it didn't work out. So I got new information and I know what to avoid the next time around, right? So those folks that have failed, quote unquote, are the people who are now figuring out how to do it well. And so those are often good bets, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think your point is well taken. I would suggest, like, to that listener, for example, is because so much of it is tied up into language, is about reframing it.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of failure, it is so the way we operate our business, our company, tEQuitable, is failure is built into the process. Like, that's intentional
Mm-hmm.
because that's how we learn. So, but you can call it something else, right? You can call it a trial. You can call it a test. You can call it learning, a learning opportunity. And if you go into it not as success or not success, and you go into it like, actually, success means I've learned something.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of our core values for the company is actually not fail fast, it's learn fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is something, though, about language that can make a difference. And so if you actually say, no, this is intentional, this is part of the process, this is how we get better, this is how we learn. And then even if it's just reframing it using a different word, which is, this is not, I'm going to try a thing and fail. This is, I'm going to try a thing and I'm going to learn, or I'm going to test a thing and see and learn, right? Those are different ways that might make it easier and kind of more palatable to the soul, truthfully, because that's what some of us need, because it's just so foreign as a concept.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about education recently. I won't tell the story of why, but one of the things that I was thinking about is kind of the scale in education is very absolutist in a way. Like, maybe you fail in a safe environment, but ultimately you get measured on your grades at the end, and the goal is to be perfect, right? Versus out in the world, quote unquote, like post-education, we're often measuring like, how much risk can I absorb in this situation? You know, how okay is it to be wrong? Therefore, I'll do the quickest thing. Like, if it's totally fine to be wrong, I'll do the quickest thing and start learning as quickly as possible. If it's not okay, it's a human safety issue, or financial risk or whatever, then I'm going to be more cautious. And we don't really learn those skills, I think, maybe in specific pathways of education, but we're more about like being right. And it's actually often much more beneficial to be wrong a bunch to find the right answer than to, think and think and think and study to get to the right answer. And so in all of that, I was wondering, and it's sort of to this point of language, like, are we framing the way that we think about problems in a way as we're younger that doesn't serve us once we're sort of, I'll call it older, but like thinking about it from a more business, corporate life perspective. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Actually, I have two things that I would build on that with. So one, I'm a big proponent of CS for all. So from elementary school, from K all the way through school. And it's not because I need everybody to learn to code. It's because the approach and the logic and the questioning and the like, oh, how do you solve that problem? And having those skills, that's really the thing that I'm a proponent of. And again, that is taught as part of programming. And so that's kind of why that's part of the reason why I'm a big proponent for it. So I totally agree with you. But I like, it just teaches so much, right? It teaches problem solving. It teaches about empathy, right? Put yourself in the shoes of the user, try to understand the problem. It teaches like detail orientedness, to think all things all the way through. So I just think that there's a lot there that, again, that those are skills, that it's not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, that are going to be really valuable as you grow forever and ever, like skills that are reusable. And if you learn them earlier, right, they just become second nature. So 100% agree. The other thing that I will kind of an adjacency is, one of the things that we talk about is how women or girls tend to be more successful in school because they are rewarded for competence, and men tend to be more successful in business because they are rewarded for confidence. Mm-hmm. And so that goes to your point of like, there's the right answer versus the like, I know the answer, but I believe in myself enough, I'm smart enough, whenever the thing comes at me, I will figure it out. And so to me, I feel like in some ways, and it depends on the country and depends on obviously the individual, but that we are trained gender wise in different ways, competence versus confidence. And I think that manifests in school versus in business.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to process that one for a second. I knew this was gonna be great. Yeah, well,
we've done a lot of things about this stuff.
No doubt. Thank you for sharing it. I think that's what I'm trying to unravel then. So yes, the reward system feels well, I guess it depends on what we want people to do when they graduate and how we want them to act. But if the reward systems are different, then something's wrong, and we should fix that. We should fix that. It's just like, somebody fix it, please. Cool. All right. Boom. We're done. Wow. And so are there other, like, that's a pretty interesting delineation, other sort of perspectives where you think people are, or where you've witnessed people being kind of rewarded or whatever, they're punished, I guess, in ways that guide them away from what we would then ultimately expect?
I mean, I think that there are so many, I don't want to say the word symptoms. I think that there are so many inputs that lead you in a certain direction. So again, because apparently all I do is talk about identity. But right, in the Black community, we have a saying that you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. Right? Don't dress for the job you're in, dress for the job you want. Like, there's all of that stuff that doesn't really, our expectations are that we're going to have to prove ourselves, that we're going to have to hold ourselves to the higher standards. I will say, same thing from a computer science degree. All of the women that I knew who studied computer science with me were all at the very, very, very top of the class, or they dropped out. So, and again, because you had to either excel, or you weren't rewarded, you weren't given this feedback, whether it's internal or external, but a lot of time it's external, right? And so there's all of these external factors that really go into it, and that we are not just raised with, but just to be clear, right, it's grounded in history and experience. Like, we're not making all this up. This is not all in our heads. And so that idea of, well, this is what I need to do. Like, you got to be better than, you got to be above and beyond in order to build the confidence that somebody's going to take a chance on you, or believe in you, or promote you. And it really is, there's all of these external factors that go into it.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense, is all I could say. I absolutely can piece it together. So then, as we talk about then, this ultimate goal, I don't know if it's our only goal, but building environments where, people feel comfortable trying things, taking risks, failing, or whatever word we're going to use, learning, right? Doing the things that give them the space to learn. Like, I've been at this a while. I could certainly, when I reflect on everything from my upbringing to my career, I'm very quick to remember all the places where something went horribly wrong, because they taught me something. Also, that's like, we're just wired to remember the bad stuff. But like, those are really, really important points. And so to have not been able to learn from them is a real problem. So if that's what we want to create, is that space, and, the inputs, oh yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yes.
Which is, so what taught you to not be gun shy, right? So we're all making the mistakes, and some of us take it and be like, oh my God, now I have to be perfect. As opposed to you, we're like, cool, let me, like, what do you think influenced you?
Do you want to?
Hi, you're welcome.
Do you want to be like guest host for a few weeks? This is awesome. I'm making this up on the fly because I'm trying to think of this, but I will say there was a point where this is kind of backwards, but let's try it. There was a point where I was doing some consulting, helping out another, I was sort of between, ideas or whatever. And so was helping out another company. And as an outsider, I found it particularly useful to diffuse tense conversations by taking the blame for things that weren't even my fault. I was like, oh yeah, I messed that up. And what would happen was everyone would be like, oh, that's fine. And then we would just move on. Like as soon as someone had like, it was like, I don't, it wasn't just that like assuming someone had someone to blame, but it took all the tension out of the situation and turned it into, we're going to go solve a problem now. And I sort of was like, oh, this is kind of fun. Like for this brief period, but then it exposed me to the fact that kind of no one actually cared. They were just frustrated, and sort of creating a release valve for that frustration allowed us to move on. And so in a weird way, like I took a bunch of blame for things that weren't my fault. And then I'm like silently going over my LinkedIn to see who's going to like go try to figure out what doesn't matter. And nothing came of it. And I was like, oh, actually, no one really cares. Like as long as and what happened was we turned the conversation to like, okay, what can we do differently? Right. So that was a big thing. And then a little later, so that for me personally, that was a big thing. And then a little later, in a much more concrete sense, I was at a conference. I heard someone from Etsy talking about their blameless culture and postmortems and sort of human factors and a bunch of like a much more academic view. I had a chance to talk to them after and just really started to get my head around, oh, this is working in our industry and here's some ways to frame it. Right. But I would say it was that sort of like sort of instinctively, the part that buried in my gut was that I literally just said this was totally my fault and no one actually cares. Like, and again, back to the primary point, not everyone is going to throw themselves into that feeling like they can, roll with it or be fine. But it was also like, I think that the thing that makes it interesting that I was consulting or contracting or whatever I was doing is that one, it felt very temporary. So it just didn't really matter to me personally. And two, right. It was like, I could be the scapegoat because everyone that was actually part of the organization now felt a little safer. And they would just be like, yeah, it's Rob's fault. Like it just became kind of fun. So I think those two things came into play. But for me as an observer, then I could see, oh, this actually creates a better situation where now we're learning. So how do I create an environment like this?
I think it's really interesting. I think there's a great lesson I think there's probably at least 2 lessons to be learned from it. I think you said acknowledging the mistake, taking the blame, however you want to say it, relieves the tension. Mm-hmm. Right. It's not like there's a like, aha, I got you. Right. Taking that moment out of it and actually being able to therefore transform it like that behavior of like, ooh, my bad. Ooh, and here's how it's not going to happen again. Here's what I learned from it. Like having that be an automatic reaction. I think you said it really well that it relieves the tension. And the second part of it, though, and maybe that's because of the framing and the context of where you were, that it was temporary, right? There wasn't a moment where, even if it was actually like something that you had messed up, that doesn't make you wrong, or stupid, or not good enough, or right? Like it's not like an internalization of like it, right? So again, stuff happens on the outside. That's not a definition of who you are. But then also, if you I want to use the word inculcate. I don't know if that's the right word. If you make that part of the norm, of the standard, of the expectation of what you're actually trying to accomplish, right, you can actually chalk it up as a win. Like to me, I tried a thing, it didn't work. That is now a win. Yes, because I learned something from it. So almost, again, back to the reframing of it.
Well, and you talked about computer science, sort of problem-solving perspective. Like I actually don't have a computer science degree. I did engineering, but, scientific method, right? Like we're just testing an idea. This is just a theorem. Like we're living our entire lives. Like everything we do day to day is founded on things that we still call theorems. We're like, yeah, this might be right. One of these days, we're probably going to prove it wrong, right? Like our entire understanding of the universe. So that seems okay. Like at that point,
I feel about gravity.
Yeah, like we get comfortable with it. And with like the whole notion of hypotheses, like this is a hypothesis. What we do is we form a hypothesis, we test it. When it was wrong, we form a new one because we have new information, right? It's just like that is a reframing. And I think, I kind of going back to the very beginning, just saying we're learning from failure versus we're testing hypotheses and getting new information and then forming new hypotheses. Like, I think it's pithy to say we're learning from failure. It's like easier, it's faster. But if you, to your point of like, this is about learning, if you just set out and say, we have a hypothesis. How do we test it? What can we do to test this hypothesis versus like, we're not going to be okay or comfortable until we're absolutely right and confident that we're right, is a great way of reframing it.
And I think that applies at all levels, right? It's not, oh, I'm just experimenting with this feature or this product, but I'm experimenting with this job. Oh, wait, maybe startup life isn't for me. That doesn't make me bad. It doesn't make the company bad, but maybe I need a more established organization. Maybe I actually get more energy from an organization that has 1,000 people than 5 people, right? So, right, that's not, it's just, you're just learning about yourself and what works for you. It doesn't make you, again, it's just this, right? That is not an indictment of who you are. And so like, so whether it's, oh, I want to try this career. Ooh, no, I don't. Right. So like it's not just in these little things, but you can actually apply it big picture as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the most liberating facets of what you just described is that you stop, if it works out, comparing yourself to everybody around you and saying, well, that person is successful, and by comparison, I am not successful, right? Like, what do I define as success? It's that I do things that I love and I work in a role that I enjoy and gives me energy and all these other things. Like, someone else probably would hate doing my job. That's totally okay, right? Like, and so I think that exactly that, like saying, oh, I'm learning things about myself, I'm learning things about this job, whatever those things are, you know, the more we're comfortable trying, experimenting, forming a hypothesis and testing it, you know, the better off we're going to be in the end, assuming, kind of to the broader point of this conversation, that we give each other the space to do that comfortably, right? And that we give each other the same support to test those hypotheses, I think.
And I think to actually build on that, to take that to the next step, one of the things that we're trying to do with tEQuitable is to really, again, help organizations create this culture that is based on success, that is based on lifting each other up, that is based on that's what it looks like. And so it's structured on collaboration versus on competition. Like, success is not a zero-sum game, right? Like, how do you build on people's strengths and actually enable them? Right, as opposed to berate them for the things that they aren't great at.
I kind of don't want to react to that because it's so like frustrating to me, but the notion, like, I'm proud to say that this is not the type of place that we have at CircleCI, but where people's success is created by, you know, blocking out other people to try to create their own, you know, their own path or whatever. Like, as a leader, all I can think is, don't you want everyone in your organization performing to the best of their abilities? Like, how is it helping you when people are being prevented from succeeding in order to create the success of others? Like, I just think, like, from a pure mathematical perspective, that sounds terrible, right? Like, why would you have people in your organization who are not contributing to the best of their abilities? But it happens. I'm just like, it doesn't make sense to me that you would want to have that environment.
But you also understand that a lot of software companies, or at least some of the major ones, the way they do performance reviews is like, it's a dog-eat-dog world. We're going to put you all in and we're going to battle. Like, right? It is defined on competition. Makes me cry.
I mean, I think there's a difference between, I feel like this is going to turn into something huge. Maybe I'm a little nervous.
Are we
No. This is great. There's a difference between everyone has exactly the same capabilities, and we are forcing, like, we are saying there's only room for some people to succeed. Like, that's very different things. And I think, you know, we do confuse them sometimes. But again, if I have people in my organization who are being prevented from succeeding or contributing to the value of the company because others are trying to make sure that they get ahead of them, like, that doesn't work out. It doesn't seem like, I don't know. I don't know what motivates that behavior.
Agreed. But I've seen it happen. I've watched it happen. I've worked at organizations that are built on that culture. Yeah, I mean, I could tell you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm nervous about where we're going to end. I've learned so much already. We're running long, so I'm going to ask now, talked about all this, so I'm going to try to pick some better phrasing for our Red Build Rewind. Can you tell me about a hypothesis that you had where when you learned that you were not correct in your hypothesis, it felt sort of catastrophic, felt like a big failure, but ultimately ended up teaching you something that you've been able to carry with you and has made you better?
Yeah, for me, because it wasn't a hypothesis, it was forced upon me. So I was fired from a job. And man, did that do a job on my self-confidence. And just to be clear, like I was mid-career, I was solidly in, I'm trying to actually think about, I had been working for 12 years at that point, right? Wasn't like I was a junior person. Like I'd had successes. My code, like I worked on Shockwave, so my code had literally like gone out to like 80% of 96% of the internet, like billions of people. So like I shouldn't have been able to have my confidence punctured like that, but whew, that was terrible. And then you just beat yourself up and I'm terrible. What have I done wrong? I can't get it right. Obviously I was in the wrong. I will say, in terms of how do you come out the other side of it? So for me, it was, I learned three things from it. First of all, 2 years later, the person who was my manager at the time who fired me was himself fired from the organization because it turns out he was super abusive and disrespectful and condescending to women. Like, turns out there was a pattern there. I was not the first. I was not the last. And I actually eventually got an apology from somebody in senior management who was like, "We're sorry, we didn't see it." White man, like prototypical, right? Like, this is what it looks like. This is what success is supposed to look like. He talked the talk, he like presented in that kind of way. And so that was perception of success. Except it turned out like, no, it took a bunch more people for him to if abuse is too strong of a word, but to decimate before anybody on the outside was like, "Huh, is there a pattern here?" So, there's a little bit of the like, "Phew, okay, it wasn't me." But that was years before I got that apology, and before somebody was like, "Oh, by the way, we found out what you were talking about." So there's a little bit of like, "Oh, thank heavens." The other thing for me that I did learn was, well, so first of all, not everybody has your back. Like, you actually got to look out for you. That thinking that you are in community, in an organization where people will celebrate you, will look at your strengths, will lift you up. Because when I got fired, somebody else was like, "Well, who's going to Gelobter all the things?" Like I'd become a verb. So I knew that there was work that I was doing that was really, really good, but that was not that wasn't a person who was able to fix the situation. So that idea of like, not everybody's created equal, not everybody's going to have your back. You need to, right? Second is you need to stand up for yourself, figure out what's important, right? Don't suffer at the hands of somebody who's mistreating you, right? Or who doesn't respect you. Like, there is a level of that. Now, again, I come from a low income background. And so there is always this like, "Oh, but I need a job, right? I need to make sure that I have income." You get like, I am not endorsing the rage quitting. I mean, if you can, go to it. If you have the resources, go to it. But, for many of us and also it's a reflection, right? Wait, oh, you only lasted 6 months at that job? Well, what does that say about you? As opposed to like, but no, I was being, discriminated against and abused and all that stuff, right? That's not, that you don't put that on your resume because people don't want to hear that. And so just figuring out like what is important to you and how to set yourself up for success, how to put yourself in a place that you can be respected, that you feel like you're being treated well. And then the third part of it, which led me to tEQuitable, is it doesn't have to be that way, right? Part of what we're trying to do with tEQuitable is change the organizational culture, is to celebrate success, is to build each other up. A win for my sister is a win for me. Like, how do we actually manifest that in a corporate environment? And so, I mean, again, I'm talking, kind of, very, very feely. the way tEQuitable does it is actually super actionable, data based, and helpful and conducive to actually creating this environment. But ultimately, at the end of the day, right, it's about creating a work environment that is psychologically safe, that is equitable, that is inclusive, that people feel recognized and seen and celebrated.
Well, if the rest of these, if all of your customers, which is hopefully a continually growing pool, get all of that benefit from this one thing that happened to you, then I'm still sorry that it happened. But at least you turned it into a great outcome. And a great outcome, a high leverage great outcome, which is awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Again, I'm sorry that it happened. I'm always sorry when that kind of thing happens. But I appreciate you sharing.
I just want to say it was not just the one thing. That was not the one instance. That was the just
yes.
Sadly, I've been working for 30 years.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate you taking all of that and channeling it into something to make all of us better. Because I think it's, as we've been talking about, it's academically, I don't know about obvious, but like it's pretty easy for us to talk academically about psychological safety. It's different to like really understand all of the impacts, all of the backgrounds that people are bringing into that scenario, and how to really create the space and listen to what matters to folks and actually realize it. Absolutely.
Can I add one more thing? So, truth telling time here. Even having just said that story out loud makes me feel anxious about how people are going to judge me because I just said that. The thing, right? Like playing the race card, the gender card, like those kinds of things. And so for me, there was a moment, we didn't talk too much about my background, right? Software engineer, worked on Shockwave, which transformed the face of the web and made the web move. Hulu helped launch Hulu, ran digital at BET Television Network, worked at the White House under President Obama as the Chief Digital Service Officer for the U.S. Department of Education. It wasn't until I got to the White House where I was like, oh, okay. Like, nobody can take my resume away from me. Nobody can be like, you're just complaining about not being successful or about failure because you're a woman, because you're Black. Right. And so, like, if you take my resume empirically, like objectively, it looks successful. But it is, even just saying like, oh, but this thing happened to me makes me feel like a failure, like out of control, like the victim, and it's really, really hard. And I just wanted to say that out loud because it's one of the things that like we can talk abstractly about failure, but the fact of the matter is just saying that made me anxious and nervous. Even though I am super successful, I was like, oh, but now people will think this way about me.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that as well. I think I don't even want to say anything more. I just want to let that hang there. That's so important. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't go away.
Well, yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to wrap up because I want people to remember that. But I still have to do the wrap up part. Lisa, right. Thank you so much.
I'm here for it.
This has been absolutely, I knew it was going to be awesome. I said it at the beginning, but I feel like I always say it. This is epic. I hope people learn from this because so much amazing information to share, thoughts, feelings. This is important stuff. And thank you to all of you who are listening, tuned in. I hope you took away as much as I did. If you enjoy it, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. And if there's someone you want us to talk to or something you want us to talk about, find us on Twitter at CircleCI. Lisa, amazing. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for the conversation.